All right, let's dive right in. In this explainer, we're going to cut through all the political noise and get straight to the playbook itself. We're talking about the specific policies that shaped Donald Trump's first term and the incredibly detailed blueprint that's been laid out for a potential second one. Our goal here is pretty simple, just to break down the strategy, from trade wars all the way to a fundamental reboot of government power.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First up, we'll look at the political revolution that got this whole agenda off the ground. Then, we'll get into the weeds on how global trade rules were completely rewritten. After that, we're going to turn our focus inward to the plans for reshaping the federal government itself, and of course, the legal fights that really push the limits of presidential power. And to wrap it all up, we'll unpack the detailed blueprint for 2025.
You know, to really get a handle on any of the policies we're about to talk about, we've got to rewind the clock to 2016. The ground was literally shifting under everyone's feet politically. There was this growing feeling that the global economic system just wasn't working for a lot of people. And that created a huge opening for a message that basically threw out the old rulebook. And this one line, from a campaign speech in Pennsylvania, it became a rallying cry. It just perfectly captured that feeling of economic anxiety and plugged right into this powerful anti-globalization mood that would end up being the absolute cornerstone of his platform.
And it wasn't just one thing, right? This visual really shows you the perfect storm that was brewing in 2016. You had this slow, sluggish economic recovery, a ton of frustration with policies like Obamacare, and this powerful story being told that America was losing its place in the world. And what's really important to remember is that this wasn't just a Republican thing. Bernie Sanders' campaign was tapping into that exact same deep frustration with global trade deals, which made it a central fight of the whole election.
So you have all this anti-globalization feeling in the air. How does that turn into actual policy? Well, that brings us to our first really big pillar, a complete, and I mean revolutionary shift in how America did business with the rest of the world.
The new philosophy was something called protectionism, and this was a complete 180-degree turn from almost 70 years of U.S. policy, which had always pushed for more free trade and fewer barriers. Instead, the focus flipped to protecting our own markets here at home, even if it meant shaking up the entire global system. And this new policy wasn't just talk. It had immediate and, frankly, explosive results. This timeline from 2018 shows just how fast things escalated. It kicked off early in the year with U.S. tariffs on stuff like steel and aluminum. By April, China hit back. Then June, it was the European Union. By July, even close allies like Canada were firing back. It became a full-blown tit-for-tat trade war.
And this chart just brilliantly shows you the scale of the change, especially with China. The average U.S. tariff on Chinese goods skyrocketed from just over 3% to more than 21%. That's a nearly seven-fold increase that completely changed the economic game between the two biggest economies on the planet. And here's the kicker. This strategy went way beyond just tariffs. It was also about systematically taking apart the institutions that actually enforce the rules of global trade. By blocking appointments to the WTO's highest court, the administration essentially paralyzed its ability to settle disputes. The result? The U.S. became pretty much immune to its rulings.
Okay, so while that trade war was shaking up America's relationship with the world, there was an equally ambitious plan taking shape right here at home. The second pillar of the playbook is all about reshaping the federal government itself, basically deconstructing it and then rebuilding it with a totally different power structure.
The big idea here was to go after the federal bureaucracy itself, what some people call the administrative state. You can think of it as the permanent machinery of government, right? The goal was to wrestle power away from all those agencies and concentrate it directly in the White House, under the president's direct control.
Now, a huge part of the playbook for a potential second term is using executive orders to basically hit undo on a predecessor's policies. This slide is a perfect example. There's already a proposed order for 2025 drafted and ready to go, and its entire purpose is to revoke a Biden-era order on economic competition.
And right at the heart of this deconstruction plan is a brand new proposed agency, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Its mission is crystal clear: shrink the government by going through all the regulations, cutting jobs, and getting rid of what it considers wasteful spending in every single department.
Another major proposal goes right after the civil service. A new job category called Schedule G would be created. This would reclassify thousands of federal workers who have a hand in making policy. And the bottom line here, it would strip away their civil service protections, making it way easier for a new administration to fire them and bring in people they want.
Now, you can probably guess what happens next.
When you try to centralize this much power, you're going to run into some serious legal and constitutional walls. And that brings us to our third pillar, the huge court battles that tested the absolute limits of a president's authority.
This was a huge deal because for the first time, you had a president who still owned a massive global business empire while in office. This led to a wave of lawsuits like we'd never seen before. They were all about the Constitution's emoluments clauses, which are basically anti-corruption rules to stop a president from taking money from foreign governments. These court fights lasted for years, but the Supreme Court eventually dismissed them, saying they were irrelevant once he was out of office.
Then there was this other massive legal front, the years-long battle over his financial records. You can see the whole back and forth here. It started with Congress issuing subpoenas, then Trump sued to block them. The case went all the way up through the courts to the Supreme Court. In a huge ruling, the court said no, a president does not have absolute immunity, but it also created a new legal test and sent the cases back down for another round.
And that whole debate about presidential power got even more intense in 2024. In the case Trump v. United States, the Supreme Court set a brand new legal standard. It ruled that former presidents have absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for their official, core presidential acts. This really changed the game on the boundaries of executive power.
All right, let's bring it all together. How do all these different pieces, the trade disruptions, the government overhaul, the tests of presidential power, how do they all fit into a highly detailed blueprint for a potential second term?
You know, the thing that's really striking here is just how prepared this plan is. We're not talking about a simple list of campaign promises. No, this is a massive catalog of fully drafted executive orders that cover almost every single government department, all ready to be signed on day one of a potential new administration.
Let me give you a concrete example. One of these proposed orders would use trade as a weapon for border policy. It calls for a 25% tariff on every single thing imported from Mexico. The stated goal? To pressure the Mexican government into doing more on immigration and drug trafficking.
Then you have another proposed order that takes direct aim at diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, or DEI. This proposal would immediately terminate all DEI programs, all DEI offices, and any related job requirements across the entire federal government.
And circling back to the international stage, another order would, once again, pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. It would also cut off all U.S. funding for international climate projects, really doubling down on that America First approach to environmental policy.
So, when you put it all together, the actions from the first term plus the detailed plans for a second, you get a really clear picture of a political playbook that's aiming for transformational change. And it leaves all of us with a pretty critical question. How might this agenda, if it's fully put into action, permanently reshape the power of the presidency and America's place on the world stage?